So this is going to be the first in a series of videos about our climate unit. And as you can see, we're going to divide climate up into an acronym called LAMECOW. Now, climate, the definition of it is very simple. However, we're also going to be talking about why certain areas have the climate that they do. This concept is slightly more complicated because there are so many different aspects to an area's climate, and as you can see, we have all of these things we have to worry about in order to figure out why an area has the climate that they do. So in this video we're going to focus on first, what is climate, how is it different than weather, and then introduce all the different factors that impact climate. Now in your notes you can see at the very top there are a bunch of essential questions. What we did is, since this note packet is so large, we're going to take the notes and divide them up into certain sections. So we're going to first focus on weather versus climate. So the only essential questions you need to answer for this specific note video is essential questions 1, 2, and 3. So first things first, over on the right hand side of your notes, all I want you to do is kind of brainstorm, either by yourself or with somebody close to you, answers to the following questions. First, what is the current weather? So take a look outside and figure out what the weather conditions are outside. Write them down. And then second, how might be climate and weather different from each other? So answer those questions, talk to the people around you, or do this by yourself. Pause the video, and then we'll kind of talk afterwards. So, current weather conditions are basically what is the atmosphere like at a particular moment in time. So, right now, while I'm doing this video, the current weather conditions in Rosemount, Minnesota is 21 degrees Fahrenheit. It's cloudy outside, the wind is calm, humidity is 88%, dew point is 18 degrees, and the barometric pressure is 30.35 inches and rising. So it just gives you a brief snapshot as to what the atmosphere is like. Now, how is that different than climate? Well, hopefully you know that weather is just a brief snapshot, whereas climate is kind of an average weather over time. So let's get that definition down in our notes. Fill in the blanks as we go. So climate is long-term. I think that's extremely important to remember, long-term. And when I say long-term, I'm talking 30 or more years worth of data. Okay, and the data that we're kind of taking a look at are certain weather conditions in a specific region. Now, the weather conditions that we're most concerned with are the average temperatures of that area. So what we'll do is we'll take the temperature, daily temperatures for every single day in the year, average them out, and we'll get an average temperature for that particular year, and then we have to average that for 30 years to get a climate. We do the same thing for precipitation, not only amounts of precipitation, but also types of precipitation. Here in Minnesota, we get lots of different types of precipitation, so we can kind of put them into different categories. And then the other thing we're kind of concerned about is how do the average temperatures and the average precipitation change as the seasons change. What I mean by that is in certain places around the world, the average temperatures and the average precipitation, the change in them is very minimal. So they have very similar weather conditions all year round. Whereas there are other places in the world, like Minnesota, where our average temperatures range drastically. In the summer we can have temperatures in the upper 90s with a heat index into the hundreds, and then in the wintertime we can have air temperatures of negative 10 degrees with wind chill factors down to the negative 40s. So big shifts in temperature. Now we can divide the world up into different climate classifications, and here's just a map of the world with all the different climate classifications. Now it was a while ago that somebody finally decided to kind of go around, travel the world, and tried to figure out, well, what can I look at in these different locations around the world that will give me a sense of what the climate is like for that place. So a German scientist named Wladimir Koppen went around the world and took a lot of data and decided that he was going to classify the climates based on three things. And those three things are average temperature, we've seen that before. Average precipitation, again, we've seen that. Those are the two things that we talked about when we're dealing with climate. But another factor that he saw that changed drastically from one climate to the next was the types of plants that you would see in that area, or the native vegetation. That's going to change based on climate. And if you think about it, plants grow in different places because of the different temperatures and the different amounts of precipitation that they get. So the plants are kind of related to the first two things. So let's take a look at Minnesota's climate classification. So if we zoom in to North America and we try to take a look at where Minnesota is, what I want you to do is really quickly, over on the right-hand side of your notes, see if you can figure out what climate classification Minnesota would be based on the colors. So pause the video, see if you can figure it out, write it down over on the right-hand side. All right, so first of all, hopefully you figured out that Minnesota is in a continental climate classification, right? We are kind of smack dab in the middle of the continent right there, okay? Now, based on the color classification, we can see that continental climate areas are based on their summers. So do we have a warm summer or do we have a cool summer? And hopefully, just by experience, it makes sense that Minnesota would be a continental warm summer climate classification. And then again, here's Minnesota in the warm summer. And we all know that it's humid here in Minnesota in the summertime. Now, getting back to our LAMECOW acronym for all of the different factors for climate, what I'd like you to do really quickly is try and figure out what each of these different letters stands for in the LAMECOW acronym. So pause the video, write in your answers, and then we'll see how close you were. All right, here we go. So in your notes, fill in the blanks. L stands for latitude, and hopefully that makes sense. The closer you are to the equator, you're going to have a different type of climate than you would at somebody higher latitude like us here in Minnesota, or even higher latitudes closer to the poles. Air pressure is going to play a big role in what your climate is going to be like. For those of you that have been in places close to mountains, the mountains act as barriers against wind, and that's going to play a role in determining what your climate is like. How far above sea level is going to play a role. That's elevation or altitude. Where you are on the continent plays a big role as well. And if you've spent any time close to big bodies of water like lakes or oceans, you understand that it plays a role in the temperature and precipitation of those areas. Ocean currents are going to pull warm and cold water close to the coasts, and that's going to play a role as well. And then finally, wind, not only local wind, but also large-scale winds like the doldrums or the prevailing westerlies are going to play a role as well. So those are all the factors. That's the difference between weather and climate. I just wanted to wrap everything up with that, and then the next video is going to get into some of these different letters for LAMECOW. So answer the essential questions at the end of your note packet, and then you're done.